Hello, I'm Jordan Hour, and welcome back to another edition of Half Hour with Jordan Hour. Today's episode will focus on the topic of standardized testing. We will hear from a variety of students who have taken MCAS, AP exams, and the SAT. Each one of these tests has a different purpose. All students must pass the MCAS in order to graduate, whereas AP exams and SAT scores are a critical factor in the college admissions process. So we're going to start off by having our guests introduce themselves, saying their grade level, and what tests you guys have taken.
My name is Mia Caldwell. I am in the 11th grade, and I've taken the SATs and the MCAS and AP tests.
What AP test have you taken?
So far, I've only taken Gov.
I'm Hallie Rudman. I'm a junior. I've taken MCAS, SATs, and AP tests. Well, just one. I took art history last year, and then I'll be taking stats this year.
I'm Artie O'Neill, a sophomore, and I've taken MCAS and will be taking AP Gov this year.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is the MCAS because they changed it this year from last year. So Artie, do you want to explain how you guys took it this year?
We took it on our iPads, and personally I didn't like it. I like writing in hand, and the iPads are kind of glitchy. It took a while to set up, but I could see how it's more efficient with the iPads and like less paper use, but personally I didn't like it.
And then how did you guys take it?
We took it on paper, and honestly, I kind of liked MCAS days because we had as much time as we needed, and it was pretty chill. But I don't think I would have wanted to take it on an iPad. I heard from teachers that it made it more stressful for some kids because like their iPad would be malfunctioning at the start of it, and then that would like increase stress levels as the test went on. So I'm glad that we were able to take it on paper.
Yeah, I mean, MCAS is pretty tedious, but it's necessary. I just think I would have really not enjoyed taking it on iPads, especially, you haven't taken the math portion, right? But I
No,
think that's
English.
going to be a lot worse even than the English, but I guess it helps the graders, so.
Yeah.
And then what was the format of your MCAS when you guys took it?
It was on paper.
No, like what was it, like essays and then questions?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, so you read the passages and then you answer like 10 questions on each passage, and then you'd have a few open responses on each, at least for the English, and then the math, there'd be like calculator and no calculator portions, I'm pretty sure, and it was just multiple choice and then short answers, and it was much easier on paper at least.
Yeah, and there was physics too.
Oh yes.
And that was just multiple choice and open responses, basically just solving problems.
And then what was the format for this year's test?
I can't speak for the math because I haven't taken it yet, but the English sounds similar, but instead of just open responses, it was kind of like an essay per passage, and maybe there was 2 passages comparing them, and like maybe writing a narrative on a different point of view.
And did you have any multiple choice questions?
Yeah, before each essay. It's like maybe 10 or something.
And then how did you guys study at all for the MCAS before?
No, never.
I think freshman year, Tringali maybe tried to prepare
Yeah, I think
us
most of
for
the
it.
teachers gave you a few practice right before you took it, but unless you really needed help, the teachers were just there to kind of give you a refresher before you take it again.
Yeah, like I never prepped on my own for it, but when I was younger and when I went to Barnstable, we had like once a week for the whole year, we had English MCAS prep.
And then do you feel as though the teachers here at Nauset prepared you enough for the test throughout the year?
Yeah, I would say so.
Miss McMillan does a good job of like practicing the different types of writing that will be on the English MCAS, whether it's like necessary, the amount she like went in depth, but it helps with your writing either way. So.
Yeah, I think especially for English, just being in school and practicing good grammatical uses and other skills helps. I don't think there's really we didn't do much specific studying for MCAS, but I don't think many people struggled, and if they did, they could obviously reach out and ask for help.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal of the MCAS is supposed to be to check that you learned what you should have in class and that you developed the skills that you were supposed to by taking the classes that you did and just by being in school. So I think ideally there shouldn't be too much prep necessary for it because it should just be testing what you're supposed to already know.
So then moving on to the SAT, how did you guys prepare for those?
For the SAT, I took my first PSAT sophomore year to kind of give a gauge on where I was at and how much studying I would need to do in order to get a high score on the SAT. So sophomore year I did fairly well, and then my mom wanted to get a tutor, so she got me and my brother both a tutor, and we saw him a few times, but really the best thing you can do to study for the SATs is just go on either Khan Academy or honestly just practice like math and English. It's kind of hard until you've taken one of the PSATs or the SATs before because it's a completely different test and it's difficult to study for, but if you put in the time in, you can definitely do well.
Yeah, for me, I took my first PSAT last fall, so my junior year, and then I took the March SATs. I was pretty happy with my PSAT score, not as happy with my SAT score, but I didn't prep for either one because I wanted to have, I guess, like a baseline for where I would be without studying and then start preparing from there. So I've been doing Khan Academy and am taking the May SAT.
Do you guys plan to take the ACT at all?
I was thinking about it because I've taken the SAT actually already 3 times and I wasn't that happy with my first score, but now I put in the work throughout the time between the tests, and definitely just taking the SAT many times brings the stress level down, and I was thinking about taking the ACT, but at this point I don't think I'm going to. But I know it's a really good option for a lot of kids, especially science-based students, because they'll do a lot better on the ACT than the SAT.
I think it depends on how I do on my next SAT. If I'm still not super happy about my score, I might try the ACT, but I think there is something to be said for having taken the PSAT and then the SAT twice and then adjusting to preparing for a completely different test. Although I know they're similar in many ways, they're also still different exams, so I'm not sure yet.
And then, Artie, do you plan on taking the SAT in the fall, or are you going to look at the ACT as an option?
I'm planning on the SAT. I haven't looked into the ACT at all.
And then, are you going to take the PSAT? Have you taken it yet, or are you going to take it as a junior?
Take it as a junior.
And then, do you guys find it hard to balance studying for the SAT with all your schoolwork and everything?
Yeah.
Yes, it's very difficult because junior year, I know like a lot of people think senior year is much harder, but personally I believe junior year is one of the most difficult years in school because you're preparing for SAT, you're taking a lot of APs. This is really what colleges are looking at. A lot of us play sports or in clubs, and you just have to balance it all and figure out what matters a lot. But the problem is that colleges don't look at just your SAT, just your AP scores. They look at everything, so you have to put an effort at everything, and it's hard to find time. But if you start early, if you start studying soon for your AP tests, you don't put too much on your plate. I know I dropped a sport this year because it was just too much. You can find time to balance it, and if you can't, you have to adjust.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been hard. That's kind of why I didn't start prepping until now. Between balancing sports and clubs and then the homework that I already have from school, you know, you're already not getting enough sleep, and then it's like, well, I have to practice a half hour each night for SATs, which just doesn't happen. So I'd say, a good thing to do is try to set a realistic goal, maybe 15 minutes a night, but then, even then, a lot of the time there's not time for that. You just fall asleep or that. So, I mean, personally, I'm not a fan of the whole, you should be prepping outside of school for this. I know when the SAT first began, you take it once, you don't prepare for it. And I think that's a better system, but I understand why it's come to what it is now. But I think that's unfortunate.
And then when you're taking the test, do you guys have trouble with the time management?
After taking the PSATs, I took the PSAT twice and the SAT 3 times, so I'm pretty good with the speed. But the problem was, when you first start it, you really have to get a grip on the time management or you're not going to finish the test, and each question counts a lot, so you have to just practice. If anything, just practice. You can do one problem and just do it in a minute time just to get the time management down, but I think that's one of the hardest aspects of the test.
Yeah, for me, I didn't have a problem with the English time. I had leftover time on that, and I was fine with the essay, even though it was kind of a cram. But the math, the first section, I didn't realize there was a short answer section, so I thought I had extra time, but I didn't. And then the next math section was tight on time, too. So definitely something that you have to work out.
And then everything on the test, do you feel as though you guys have learned throughout high school and that teachers here at NOSTA prepared you enough for that?
Mostly. I was surprised on the math section to get a few statistics-based questions that I know I know how to solve them because I'm taking AP Stats this year, and that was kind of a last-minute decision that I made to take that class. So if I hadn't taken that class, there would have been a few problems that I would not have known how to solve. So I was surprised by that because it's not a class that everyone's taken by junior year.
Yeah, and if it's something that you don't know, you weren't taught in class, it's usually just 1 or 2 questions, and you can sometimes use reasoning to find the answer, but you can't prepare for every single question on the test because they're not telling you this question is going to be this base, so we can't really prepare for that. But the teachers give you a good background, and if you want to be prepared for every question, you're probably going to have to do some outside studying, but the math section at least, it's pretty prepared for the test.
So moving on to AP exams, what AP exams are you guys taking this year?
This year I'm taking APUSH, AP US History, AP Psychology, AP Bio, and AP English.
It's a lot. Hallie?
I'm just taking AP Stats this year.
And then Artie, you said.
AP Gov.
So you've taken AP Gov. Do you have any advice for Artie when he's taking the exam?
You're lucky to have a great teacher. I know everyone says this about Mr. McNamara, but he is one of my favorite teachers. I think I'm actually going to ask him to write one of my recs, but he really prepares you for the test. I wish every teacher was like dedicated to their work as Mr. McNamara because he will make sure everyone is prepared, and even if you don't feel prepared, his class, a lot of people say this, it's harder than the actual test, but even though he does a really great job preparing, you still have to put in the effort and not be overconfident and study hard.
And then Mia, you take 4 AP classes, so how do you balance your time between those?
I don't really know how I balance my time. It's a lot of work, but I don't know, the workload isn't as heavy as people say. A lot of like guidance counselors say it's 3, 4, 5 hours per class per night or something.
Yeah, I think it's something like that.
But it's, for me, my schedule is pretty good right now. I have 2 APs on each day, and I have ample time to complete my classes and all my homework. And I also do sports, but I think doing sports and staying busy actually keeps me motivated to work hard. And just completing your work is not really about how much you get. It's about, are you motivated to complete it? Are you determined to do well in this class? Because if you have the right mindset, you can complete your work.
And then Hallie, I also know you're taking 1 AP, but you're also doing some IB classes.
Yeah, so I'm taking 1 AP and 3 IBHLs and oceanography, which is a UMass Boston class that's taught at our school. So yeah, it's a lot. It was definitely an adjustment from sophomore year. But I mean, I think what people need to understand is that you can't put 110% into every single assignment, but you still need to put the work in to get the grades that you want. So I think it's about finding a balance, but it definitely has been a lot.
Do you think taking the IB classes was a good decision, or do you wish you took more APs?
I really like what I've learned in the IB classes. I mean, the thing about IB-HL classes is that they're taught at the same level as APs. So as far as the challenge of the class, it's about the same, but IB has a focus on global learning and global perspective. So I think it's been really interesting learning in my history class and English class especially. Like in my English class, our first unit was works and translation, so the books were Paradise of the Blind, God's Bits of Wood, and A Doll's House, which were Vietnamese, Senegalese, and Norwegian, translated into English. So I think that was a really interesting perspective that we got from that. And then in history, we learned about civil rights, Vietnam War, Cold War, and World War II, which were things I hadn't really gone in depth on before. So it was really cool to learn about that.
And then Artie, I know you have a choice coming up in your junior year if you want to do AP classes or IB. Do you have any thoughts or what you're going to do?
I'm personally choosing AP classes over IB, but that's mainly because I don't want to feel locked into the same class for 2 years in IB, just because I like changing my classes every year, like new teachers, new classes. But I could see where like Hallie's coming from, how she might want to go more in depth in certain subjects for the 2-year period, because you have more time to learn the subject itself.
And then do you know what AP classes you're going to take next year?
Yes, I'm taking AP Computer Science, AP US History or APUSH, and AP English.
And then when do you guys think is a good time to start studying for AP exams? Because they're usually 2 weeks in May, which is coming up.
I think the best time if you don't want to be stressed is now, but a lot of kids are going to wait until the week before. I think especially it's hard right now because it's like feeling like summer, you want to go be with your friends, but if you really want to do well, you have to just put in a little effort each day. And even if you think, oh, I have time, it's so much easier to space out your studying and start as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a well-taught AP class, I feel like you shouldn't have to do a ton of preparation for the actual exam because the teacher has been helping you with the material all year long. Like with my art history class, I didn't prepare as much as I probably should have for the exam because it was just a really, really busy time. But I had worked so hard on studying for every single test that we had and worked really hard on all the assignments that we did. So it ended up working out fine because I'd worked so hard on the material during the school year. But I definitely think that if you're not putting in 100% effort during the rest of the year, then you will need to prepare more for the exam, and like Mia said, starting early is best.
And then how do you guys usually study for the exam?
I know for Gov I didn't really need to study that much because Mr. Mack, like throughout the year you're doing vocab, you're refreshing from old chapters, and he really prepares you well. For my other classes, I know bio is a really hard AP exam. A lot of kids are lucky if they even finish the test. So for that, I'm just going to be studying. Hopefully, if I have time to study, I will do the FRQs, practice, and get the time down. For my other classes, AP English, it's hard to study for that because it's just questions on reading passages. It's kind of like MCAS, but much harder. So the best way to study for English is I guess read, and if you really want, do some practice open responses. For psychology, you learn a lot of material in the time that you have, so you just have to, I'll probably just go through my Quizlets and make sure I remember everything from the beginning of the year because it was so long ago. And for APUSH, it's a lot of stuff to learn. You're learning things from when people first landed in America all the way up to today, and you just have to have a basic understanding of the context and be able to use it in essays and be prepared for anything. So the best way for me to study is just review things from throughout the year.
For me, for art history last year, like I said, I didn't prepare as much as I intended to, but what I did do was look at my slides, which had been homework all year, to make a slide for each art piece that you needed to know. So going over those was helpful, especially like seeing your own work that you did rather than just reading a textbook. I think makes the information stick a little better. I looked at Quizlets that I had made, but what was really helpful that Mr. Clark did was on our tests, I think starting maybe the second half of the year or even a little earlier for the identification section where you have to write down the AP identifiers for pieces of art, he would mix in pieces from old units so that you were reviewing those kind of as the year went on rather than just cramming for it at the end. So I think that was really helpful.
And then do you have any ideas how you're going to study?
Mainly Quizlet probably because, Mr. Mack always harps about vocab to us, and that's my personal favorite way to study vocab. So I think if I nail the vocab, the other questions should just come with it since they're all tied in.
And then have you guys ever been a part of a study group of any type?
For the stats mid-year, there was a study group, which was helpful. I feel like with math, I don't necessarily think to ask all the questions or study everything that I might need to because I forget that we learned it. So it was helpful being with a group of people, especially for a math class, I would say, because things get brought up that you might not have remembered you needed to know. So going over that in a group was really helpful, and I would like to do that before the AP exam too if I can.
And I don't usually like studying with other people. I just like being on my own and seeing what I need to get better and what improvements I need to make. But I think I might have gone to study group probably with you actually for AP Gov, but it didn't really help me that much. I can see how it can help a lot of kids, especially if you have like a tutoring session with National Honor Society. But if you don't feel like a study group is good for you, then just do it by yourself. But study groups also help to motivate you to do better.
And then after you guys have taken like these exams and like your SAT scores, do you think the scores are a good reflection of you as a student?
I think for AP classes, it depends on the teacher you had. I think if you had a teacher that prepared the whole class really well for the exam, then yes, the score is a reflection of how you're doing as a student, because it reflects the work that you put into the class, because through that class you were given the opportunity to do well. And that's been my experience in the classes that I've taken. But I know some APs are less well taught than others, and even the best, most hardworking students will not be able to get that 4 or 5 that they want. So I don't think it's consistently a reflection of how a student is doing in school, but I think in certain classes it definitely is.
I don't think it's really possible to see a student based on their scores. However, I think sometimes scores are a good reflection. Like if you worked really hard and you got that 5, or you worked really hard and you got a good SAT score, it does show that you're dedicated and hardworking. But a lot of kids also have test anxiety, which is a serious problem, because you'll prepare, you're a good student, you get A's, you get honors in classes, but when that test comes, you get stressed and you don't do well. In colleges, they might be able to see that you're a good student, but when you get that score, they see that score and it's unfair, because you know you worked hard and you deserve a better grade, but you're stressed. So I'm not sure if I really believe one test can reflect how you do on how you are as a student, but they can't really evaluate each student that applies to their school, because there's so many students and one test is how they do it.
And then, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can only really speak for MCAS because I haven't taken any AP or SAT tests yet. But for MCAS, I don't really think it's a good representation of who the student is, because I know I didn't prepare at all. I don't know anyone who really prepared for MCAS, and I don't even really know anyone who focused that hard during the test, because like it kind of has a persona of being a joke almost. So if you maybe don't get like a perfect score on it, but you like do well in English as a class, and then they see that, or someone sees it and like, oh, maybe they're just not like good testing, like maybe they just didn't try because it has a persona of not being that important, because you just need a pass to graduate.
And then, in general, what are your opinions on standardized testing, and do you think it's fair that they're a critical factor in the college admissions process?
Like I said before, it's kind of hard to say because it's impossible for colleges to evaluate each student. I think standardized testing are somewhat necessary because there's no other way to evaluate between schools, between states, between all the students in the country without using standardized testing. I don't know about MCAS because a lot of kids, like already said, they don't try because it doesn't matter very much. But SATs and AP exams are really looked at, and it's hard to say if they should be, but I don't think there's a way around it.
For me, I feel like AP tests are fair for the most part, unless you had the bad luck of being ill-prepared by the class that you took for the exam. But for the most part, I think they're a good reflection of how well you know the material that you learn in the class, because you studied it specifically for that exam, so that makes sense to me. But with SATs, I feel like to the point that they've gotten now where everyone's, preparing so hard for them, like outside of regular school, when you're learning in school kind of what you need to know for each class you're taking, the fact that it requires a lot of extra effort outside of that, and that in more competitive schools, a lot of kids are aiming for the high 1500s or even a 1600. I think it's gone a little too far. The degree to which SATs matter, I know some schools have become test optional, but test optional, it's not like, it's like you should send an SAT, but you have the option not to. Like I know Bates has become test optional, but I feel like it's still, recommended and you should take it and you should get a high score. So I feel like there's too much pressure on that. But with MCAS, I feel like it's fine the way it is because it's not like it factors into your college. I think it's more a reflection of the school, which is fair because if your teachers prepared you well enough for that exam, which is pretty much just a reflection of what you learned in class, then I think that's fine.
I don't think MCAS should really be here. I don't see the point in it, but I mean, to each his own. But the like bigger standardized testings like SATs and AP tests, I think they have to be here to like compare you to maybe someone out of state on how well you know the material. But the factor of test anxiety and stressing over it, adding like unnecessary pressure on yourself, could impact that and not display like how well you know the material as well as maybe like a regular test in the class.
Okay, well, thank you guys very much. That is all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about these students' experiences and advice they have about standardized testing. Thank you for watching this week's episode of Half Hour with Jordan Hour. I'm Jordan Hour, and I will see you next time.